Why is everybody moving out of Washington, D.C.? We're going to talk today about what you really need to know about what is happening in D.C. So the real estate market inside Washington, D.C. has been probably the strangest that I've ever seen in my 20 years of living here. Some properties have multiple offers, and others, which should have sold immediately, are lingering on the market. It is very weird. We want to know what's going on. How can you make wise decisions in this current environment? And what do I really think about all of it? Because we know I'm going to tell you that, right? So I'm Melissa Terzis, DC Real Estate Mama. I do these videos for you every week. I break down living in DC, Maryland, and Northern Virginia. I write everything myself. There is no AI here, guys, right? Like one time I put something into AI just for the fun of it and actually spit back like the script of one of my videos. I'm like, oh, how dare you, ChatGPT? How dare you? Anyway, subscribe. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss anything when I post new videos. All right. Now, when I worked for some DC home builders, they would always say, like, that was like the common thing that we would say there. The pie cools from the outside in, right? Pull the pie out of the oven, the outside gets cooler before the middle of it does. And so that really meant for markets, real estate markets, that when they slowed down, those ex-urbs and way out, where people bought way far out thinking, oh, the movement's going to come here and all of that, that would be the first place that would feel the impacts of slowing markets. And then the towns that were closer to or commutable to the employment areas, like Tyson's and downtown DC, well, those places always had a high demand for housing. So they didn't suffer anywhere near like what the ex-urbs, as they call them, did. So let's stick with that theme of the pie cooling from the outside in. That all blew up during the 2008 housing crisis. And all those places where people bought homes way far out, they were going into foreclosure, right? Because the value didn't keep up with them. The homes lost value, and many buyers ended up just walking away. And so everybody kind of was like, well, that was a real learning lesson. We're not going to make that mistake again. Except that nobody predicted a pandemic. People wanted yards, they wanted more living space, they wanted home offices, home gyms, and in-law suites. And the trend now is actually shifting back to larger homes, which those were falling out of favor right before COVID and in the late 2010s. So the pie is like cooling from the middle now, outward, kind of. I mean, more so think of it like a microwavable pie, right? Where there are random hot spots and then there's just parts that are still frozen and you just have no idea what you're going to get. That's what's happening now to our real estate market in DC and the immediate surrounds. So what do you need to know? Well, I'm going to go through several things that I think are really important that you should know. What about crime? All right, another thing we all knew, that teenager reign of terror on DC could not last forever. Crime is down 34% compared to 2023. Finally. We have still got a way to go, but the DC police have been vigilant about getting some well-known gangs off the streets, and increasing the police presence in known problem areas. Homicides in 2023 peaked at 274 homicides for the past 20 years, right? That was the highest number all the way back to the early 2000s. We are almost at the end of 2024, and we are currently standing at 158 homicides. I don't want to jinx us. But like, even if, we had one every other day, we still wouldn't get to the 200, and last year was 274. I realize I'm brokering in people who've died here, but still, I'm trying to make a comparison that compared to last year, we're hopefully starting a trend that's better. Robbery is also down almost 40%, and we hear less news about carjackings, thank goodness. There's always going to be crime in the city, but at least it doesn't feel as hopeless as it did like a year or two ago. But it was a lot for people, and I think that it was too much, and they bailed out of DC life. The pros and cons situation, like the pros no longer outweighed the cons. And I have to knock on wood. We've been lucky in that respect. I think partially because we're sort of isolated where we live in the city. But I gotta say, looking back, I don't know if I would do this again. So I'm sort of with the people that left. Like, I get that. We've been extremely vigilant about being aware of our surroundings, staying out of danger. I'm always talking to the girls about paying attention and staying alert. When we park the car, don't dawdle in the car. When we get in the car, like, we're not dawdling, we're driving right away. Get your seatbelt on, we're going. Moving out of the way when somebody with clear issues is coming barreling down the sidewalk at us, or when I have to aggressively yank them away when they're too close to somebody who's shouting out their sidewalk manifesto, because that happens too here. And the kids will always say, like, why did you pull me away? And it's like, well, I mean, you were walking right in front of them, and I really just wanted to steer clear. Avoidance is the best way, right? Run, hide, fight. Run if you can, hide if you can't run, and fight if you have to. That's basically how I look at it. So another thing, like, we had a field trip in DC. They were taking my daughter's third grade class to a DC neighborhood that I wasn't comfortable with. I'm going to tell you something. I was not the only parent who kept my kid home that day. That was a little bit like, woo, is anybody watching the store? Like, what's going on here? Sometimes when I head out to show homes too, sometimes the girls, one of them will ask to come, and there's times where I have to say not this time because of the location I'm going to. I never used to feel that way, but now I do. Last year, I went to show a condo near GW Hospital, which is a neighborhood I've never, ever felt unsafe in. And my older daughter happened to be off school that day, so I took her with me. When she got out of the car on her side and I was on my side, some guy was coming along the sidewalk and he started screaming at her, yelling at her, why did she get out of the car, and calling her all kinds of names. And she started yelling, Mom, Mom. And then I went and grabbed her, and we actually had to run. Like, he grabbed one of those empty, like, 5-gallon water bottles that was on somebody's front porch and started chasing us with it. It was not one of my better days in DC at all. I was really not happy. Needless to say, when I take my children with me in the city, I'm armed with multiple different items because I need to keep them safe as well as myself. So people are always going to say to you that crime can happen anywhere, and that is true. But it also is true that you take more of a chance living in the city as opposed to the suburbs. So there you go. That is why a lot of people have left. Next up, the schools. What about them schools? Well, all right, we happily got through elementary school here, but we admittedly went to private for middle school, and I have no regrets about that at all. We trek up to Maryland twice a day for drop-off and pickup, and this was a decision that we had to make because we really couldn't send our older daughter, Mercina, the lovely Mercina. She's not the best at standing up for herself. We just couldn't send her to a school with, like, unchecked behavioral and educational issues, kids vaping in the bathrooms, kids fighting, having after-school fights. They had no control over any of that. The year she would have enrolled, the PTO actually had the principal overthrown. It was wild. So provided that you're okay with your in-boundary school and you don't have to go out to the lottery in DC to figure out a better school for yourself, you might have a good experience, right? And that might be okay. But you have to know that you're always at the whim of DC public schools, and that the things that they come up with to make life miserable are going to affect you. For example, if you want to be a field trip chaperone, you have to get reapproved every 2 years. Do you want to know what getting reapproved entails? You have to get your fingerprints done. Do you know how many times my fingerprints have changed in the last, 5 decades? They haven't. So I don't understand why they do this nonsense. Anyway, if you want your kids to be successful with school, you have to be part of a strong group of parents who advocate really hard for that school. The parents that got that middle school principal overthrown, they got the school turned around quickly. And I'm at the point now where 2 years later, I'd be just fine letting Leah go there. She doesn't want to, but, also the other problem, of course, is that my comfort level with a school, or any parent's comfort level, that can be ripped out from underneath you like a carpet so quickly. The principal and the other problematic staff were removed very, very swiftly at the end of the last school year, but that's not normally how dealing with the DC powers that be happens. And I know things can turn on a dime. So yes, private school for Leah, it is. All right, the next thing to know is taxation without representation. All right, I don't actually think that this is a reason people leave DC, but there are things to know about how DC is run, and I do think it contributes to the overall frustration of potentially why a lot of people have considered leaving. People are always lobbying for statehood here, right? But DC has a long, strong history of corrupt politicians. We all just learned that the representative for Ward 8 was taking bribes from contractors. Frankly, I don't want to see another layer of government added here because I'm not so naive to think that the oversight would actually be competent. We would just end up having two levels of potentially corrupt government instead of one, and one would be just as ridiculous as the other. And instead of going to one moron in one department for approval on something, they would probably make us go to two different departments. And we all know how that would go, right? They would both be pointing at each other saying, this is for the state to handle. No, this is a city government issue. No, no, no. And then you would end up in a seventh loop of hell and you would never get out of it. And that's pretty much how things are now. I just can't imagine it twofold. Anyway, dealing with most agencies within DC is a nightmare. Except the morgue, you guys. I just had to call them a bunch because I had a friend who died. It was very, very bad. And they're really nice at the morgue. But I guess if you deal with people all day who don't talk back to you, that maybe when the phone rings, you're like, hello, maybe you're very excited. I don't know. Anyway, something else. If you want a firearm to protect yourself from the teenagers who have their firearms, but you want to do it legally, here's what you have to do. You have to go somewhere to buy a firearm. But they don't sell them in DC, so you have to have a car or be able to get somewhere that's outside of the city, right? Then you pick up you pick out your firearm, and then they actually ship it to a third-party dealer in DC, of which there's actually only one, so everybody goes to the same person. They contact you, they make an appointment for you to come in, they fill out the application for you, and then they tell you to wait until DC calls you to go in and do whatever you have to do. They have to do a background check, they have to fingerprint you, they have to sign off on your license, and it literally probably sits in a police officer's inbox for 90 days because they tell you you have to wait 90 days, and that thing arrives on the 90th day every single time. The incompetence is real, you guys. Anyway, I moved to DuPont Circle from Rockville, Maryland in 2004. DC was then a thriving, bustling place that everybody wanted to be. And I watched as the growth moved from the western part of the city to the eastern part, with new residential and retail developments gentrifying everything in its path. And while you'll always hear these people that sort of like are the old-time DC and they kind of long for the gritty days of the open air drug markets and the days when you couldn't walk to your car without getting mugged, the changes that were coming in the early 2000s were definitely for the better. I was one of DC's biggest boosters for all of those years, and even my tune has shifted. I love and still love DuPont Circle. My first 10 years in the city were spent there. Now the second decade has been in Glover Park. I love this neighborhood. It's been great for us. It's been great for our kids. The convenience getting for me in and out of the city over to Virginia, up to Maryland is like, you cannot beat it. It's great. But if I didn't live here or a few other select neighborhoods in DC, I honestly can't say that I would be okay, because if I couldn't let the kids run around without me on the watch all the time, I probably would have been definitely one of those people leaving for the burbs. Money is made when there is an opportunity, and then somebody spots that opportunity and then they act on that opportunity, right? So I'm telling you that right now there are opportunities. I've been screaming it from the rooftops. Let's do a case study, because I think that's probably going to resonate more. One of my lovely clients was in the market this year to buy an investment property in DC. He wanted to purchase something at a great price that would pay steady rental income, and basically he wanted to hold on to it forever, right? So my model when people come to me with this kind of query is the best bang for your buck is pretty much always going to be a one-bedroom condo with lower monthly condo fees. They're lower maintenance. There's not as much of the big ticket items that you might have to worry about, like a leaking roof or basement. And then they also rent really quickly and easily. So condos are being overlooked right now as everybody slides into that next generation of post-pandemic life and what the concept of working actually means. If you need extra space for an office, small condos may not work for you. A one-bedroom might not work. But if you're back in the office several days a week or all days per week and you can make a one-bedroom work, you should consider doing it. Right now, there are many one-bedrooms in all neighborhoods. A lot are in luxury DC buildings that normally would have sold at much higher higher prices. Back before COVID and even into the first couple years post-COVID, condo prices had steadily climbed for one bedrooms into the 500s. Some buildings actually reached prices in the 600s. We were tracking with New York City prices, and it was wild because even then I was like, these prices seem crazy. But now you can snap something up in the 400,000s. And now I'm saying these prices seem crazy. So my client ended up purchasing a one bedroom in Mount Vernon Square with parking and a rooftop pool for $450,000. I actually still can't believe that. It was such a steal. And there's great deals on two bedrooms also. Like, I have an awesome property that's listed right now for $100,000 less than it should be. And there's just, it's crickets. There's nobody out there. And what's frustrating for me and for the sellers is that I know that like a year or two from now, people are going to look back and say, darn, we could have had this place for $100,000 less than it is listed now. You know, all right. I mean, everybody always has 20/20 hindsight going backwards, but when they're blind, like looking into the future, it's crazy. So what if you're not looking for an investment? Well, I also had a client take advantage of the opportunity and just snagged a condo in Northeast DC that had been sitting on the market. It was really close to her friends, it was close to her work, and it was perfect for her first purchase. She got a great deal, she got help with closing costs, and she's gonna plan to rent it out when she moves to a bigger place and upgrades to that like next home. So that is how you build wealth. And what you should focus on in finding the right opportunity, if you wanna know, it's the same everywhere. Location, 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 and price. You also, will be lucky enough to have the ability to negotiate. You and I both know that DC isn't going to fall apart. It will again have a strong market. So I say that now is a great time to buy. But what about the interest rates? Okay, that's next. So here's another thing that you and I both know. Interest rates are going to come down again. This isn't forever. And when they come back down, buyers will come back to the market to get in on the good rates. But by then, the prices are going to be going up. So would you rather buy at a lower price now with a higher interest rate and then watch your budget very carefully in the short term and then refinance when rates go up? Or would you rather buy at a higher price with a lower interest rate? Don't answer yet. It actually doesn't matter what the answer is to this question for you because the proof is in the pudding. There are very, very few buyers out there right now looking for homes because it's painful for them, right? It's painful to buy at these interest rates. But here's the thing that you need to know. Once you buy, you never get that money back. You can't go back to the seller and say, I think I overpaid and I'd like my money back. So choose wisely, my friends. Now I'm going to tell you how I feel about it. I bought a house this year. The interest rate's painful. So I think you kind of know where my head is on the matter. The reason, though, that nobody seems to want to do this is because people, they live in today and they think that this is about how today's interest rates are in the sevens. And I want you to think about next year. Can you tighten your belt for 6 months to a year? Again, another thing, I just want to scream this from the rooftops. Buy now. The DC market will rebound. It always does. Our country's government is based here, and that will forever keep Washington, D.C. a strong real estate market. But right now, people aren't willing to take on that higher interest rate for a property in the city that nobody else seems to want. So that's that. That's kind of like a state of the union as we have it in DC. I hope this was helpful to sort of bring you up to speed, explain why people are leaving, explain what I feel about it now. And if you have any questions, my contact info is coming next.